White as snow, red as blood. Chapter 5. Coming off the mountain, the girls traveled on their horse while Nathaniel guided it. He insisted upon the arrangement with the excuse that he needed to practice using his two legs again. The girls couldn't think of a rebuttal, so they let him do as he pleased. However, once they reached the first settlement, the girls demanded they switch places. Nathaniel resisted but couldn't beat Rose Red's argument about how the scene would appear to villagers. He relented and helped the girls dismount. Rose hopped off elegantly, taking Nathaniel's hand with no trouble. When he went to help Snow, she was a little more hesitant. With a breath, she laid her icy hand on his and dismounted. However, she slipped on a patch of ice when her feet hit the ground. Nathaniel quickly pulled her in closer and asked if she was all right. Snow nodded, desperately trying not to look at his face. Noticing she was uncomfortable, he backed away and let out a laugh. "Guess even Snow White slips on ice," he said, "be careful." Snow nodded again, uttering no sound. Her face betrayed her, though, as it glowed pink. Nathaniel then took his place on the steed while Rose held the reins and led the horse through the streets. On the other side of the horse, Snow White put her hand on the animal's neck. It made her think of when she walked with Nathaniel out in the forest when he was a bear and patted his fur. Snow was still trying to process his transformation. She knew the man with them was indeed the one and the same as the bear, but she didn't know how to interact with a man. She used to think of him as a loving friend or even a pet. Her whole life was changing, and she didn't like the feeling. When they reached the entrance of the castle grounds, guards met them at the gate. One said, "Halt. The grounds are not currently open to the public. State your business here." The other guard turned his head to Rose, and through his helmet, he explained, "This is Rose Red. She sells herbs. We can let her through." Apparently, this didn't satisfy the other guard. He shook his head and tightened his grip around his spear. "Then she and her friends can come back later. The Crown Prince is currently using the grounds." Rose stepped forward and opened her mouth to speak, gesturing to Nathaniel. "Please, the Crown Prince." "Orders are orders," the law-abiding guard yelled, "now step back." Richard, on the other side of the wall, heard the commotion. Once he spotted Rose's red cloak and a man with familiar brown hair, he came running, leaving behind the men he had gathered for a search party. The prince ordered the guards to open the gate. Having received a direct command from their prince, no one protested. Richard ducked under the gate as soon as there was enough space and dashed to the group gleefully. Nathaniel got down from the horse and met his brother with open arms. They embraced before they walked forward through the entrance. The girls followed behind them with their horse. The guards whispered to each other, wondering what was happening. Before the guards closed the gate, Richard turned to them and said, "This is Prince Nathaniel. I expect you to remember my brother's face and these lovely girls, Rose Red and Snow White. They are our guests and friends of the crown, which means from here on out, they are allowed entrance no matter the circumstances." The guards nodded, understanding Richard's command. Once the gate was shut, the guards chattered excitedly about what happened. They were the first people to see Prince Nathaniel in years. Plus, there was Rose Red and Snow White, who they assumed were the two princes betrothed. That being said, the guards who knew Rose were holding back their grief, though losing to a prince sounded better than losing to a peer. "So you killed the wizard?" Richard declared as they walked down the brick path leading to the open drawbridge. "I was about to send a fleet of men to search for you and tell you how to break your curse, but it appears you figured it out yourself." "Well, I wasn't idle just because I was a bear." "And I see you're familiar with these lovely ladies," Nathaniel said, suggesting everything with his eyes. Richard glanced at the girls, grinning. "Well, of course. I heard they adopted you as a bear cub. Nathaniel affirmed his brother's statement with a curt nod. Which is why I was wondering if it is in my power to give someone a title. Well, they could be adopted by a noble family, or the reigning monarch could create one for them. Of course, there is another way to gain a title. Nathaniel was quick to respond, stating what his brother would not. You mean marriage? Now that's an idea. He spun to face the girls, halting their walk. Richard pressed a hand to his head, wishing Nathaniel had forgotten all the court's rules and his foolhardiness. Apparently, being a bear didn't erase his personality. All right, Rose, who would you rather marry? Me or Richard? Nathaniel asked, predicting both her verbal answer and her genuine response. Stop talking nonsense. We're here to work as court herbalists, she pouted, crossing her arms. Isn't that right, Snow? Snow nodded while a built-up tension was released. She didn't like where the conversation was going, so she was relieved that Rose deflected it. Of course, Rose couldn't help but turn the table. After all, how could she let Nathaniel put her on the spot without returning the favor? Rose smiled coyly and approached Nathaniel. She placed one hand under her chin while looking him dead in the eyes. Besides, as the men, aren't you the ones who would propose? So, Nathaniel, the real question is, who would you ask? Richard instantly cracked into a wild fit of laughter. He patted Nathaniel's back while Nathaniel struggled for words. She's got you there. Nathaniel chuckled faintly, wishing he could melt into the earth. His eyes darted over to Snow as his mind ran in circles, looking for an appropriate answer. He couldn't admit his feelings just yet. It might overwhelm her, which meant his wording had to be thought through. I was not being serious, but I'm not going to cower from my own grave. Out of the two of you, I would marry Snow. Snow, who distracted herself by playing with her hair, looked up at the sound of her name. Nathaniel instantly dodged her gaze and continued his explanation before Rose or Richard could throw words into his mouth. For starters, she doesn't get on my case as nearly as you do, Rose. Also, you caused me a lot of pain when you brushed my fur back in the day. This time, Snow laughed, surprising everyone. Rose gaped at her sister while Snow covered her mouth to stop the snickers. He's right. You weren't very gentle brushing my hair either when we were younger, but you always insisted on doing it. Hey, how did this come back to me? Rose protested, but before she could think of a comeback, the enormous double doors of the castle opened. Queen Astrid stepped out, wearing a beautiful forest green dress with a white collar. When she strode across the drawbridge, the four bowed respectfully to her. She took little note of the action and hugged Nathaniel as he stood up from his bow. My dear boy, you have finally returned to us. I've missed you greatly. As have I, he said, I've finally gotten rid of the wizard that betrayed you so long ago. Affectionately, she brushed her son's face, but the cost was all too much. Queen Astrid glanced behind him, spotting Rose Red and then Snow White. At the sight of Snow's fair skin and Rose's ruby lips, the queen gasped, stepping back. White as snow and red as blood. Her thoughts had not jumped to a conclusion after all when she first saw Rose Red. Surely, their presence isn't a coincidence. Nathaniel stood beside Rose, misjudging his mother's reaction. Ah, yes, let me introduce you. These ladies ensured my safety during the freezing storms. They are herbalists and have been offered positions at the castle, but it would please me if they could be granted an official title. To me, they are friends of the crown. Queen Astrid forced a smile. Nothing would make me happier, but you haven't yet told me their names. Right, this one is Rose Red. When I was a bear, she always brushed my fur and told me jokes. She's also Richard's bride-to-be, Nathaniel teased, making Richard tense up. Queen Astrid raised her eyebrows at her eldest son. She isn't my bride, Mother, Richard tried to explain. Earlier, when Nathaniel was asking about titles, Queen Astrid ignored his comment, noticing how her darling boy kept glancing at Rose despite his spoken refusal of the idea. Oh, Richard. Stop now before you embarrass yourself further. I understand what has transpired. To Rose, she said, it is lovely to meet you. Rose Red bowed once more, likewise, my queen. You truly are the fairest in the land. Queen Astrid smiled in approval. However, when Nathaniel moved closer to Snow, she was reminded of the danger the girls posed. And this is Snow White. He was going to say more, but Queen Astrid clicked her tongue and repeated her name. Snow White, you say? What a pretty name. And what fair skin, perfect to go with lightly blushed cheeks. She laughed boisterously. If you had your sister's hair and ruby lips, you'd be the fairest maiden in the kingdom. Thank you, your majesty, Snow White said softly, like the snow that fell upon them. Nathaniel continued, now brave enough to place his hands on Snow's shoulders. She is the one that read and sang to me while I warmed myself by the fire. She is a kind-hearted person. So it would seem, Queen Astrid said, snarling underneath her smile. The queen snapped herself out of it by clapping her hands together. Nathaniel blinked, as did Snow. Let's all get inside. We have much cause to celebrate with Nathaniel's return. They followed her inside. The warmth of the castle's halls melted the snow off their shoes, and servants took their capes and cloaks from them to dry. Queen Astrid twirled in her dress and declared, as friends of the crown, you girls shall not lift a finger while the festivities are being held. Dresses will be made for you, and you will sleep in the rooms next to the royal families. We are very grateful, your majesty, but are no rooms available for court herbalists? Rose asked, that is why we came. Queen Astrid scoffed, why, my dear child, the herbalists are in a separate facility. I will not have you walking in the cold when there is no need to. Now, I have a feast to prepare, so please follow the staff to your rooms. Without further argument, the girls and the princes obeyed. As for Queen Astrid, she hurriedly went into her husband's old study and pulled out the mirror she kept in her dress hidden pockets. Mirror, show me that moment again. What did the prophetess say? What did she see? The glass fogged over, taking the queen back to when she visited a prophetess. The two women sat in a dark room, and the prophetess held the queen's hand while her mind peered into the future. I see fortune and power in your future. You will lead your kingdom, but you hide a secret. One that could ruin the image you protect. I see your doom and a maiden. Queen Astrid clenched the mirror tighter, listening as intently as she was back then. A maiden? She will bring me to ruin? What does she look like? The queen's past demanded. I see lips as red as blood and skin as white as snow. This maiden is undoubtedly the fairest in the land. Relax your mind so you might see what I see. The queen still remembered without the mirror showing her. The image was unclear, but it was a close-up of a girl's crimson lips, then flashed to the back of a girl's head. The girl had pale skin and light blonde hair and wore a blue cloak. Queen Astrid slammed the mirror down on the desk in front of her. She gasped for air while she leaned against the desk's frame. All this time, I was led to believe it was one, but it was two. You knew, did you, wizard? But, they are with me now. There's not an action they can take that I won't know about.